Hello. Okay, so this is part two of my What Happened in the Beginning of the World series. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and tie in the underground with the surface world. I'm going to try and tie in why what's happening in the underground is what we're seeing on the surface world and why that's happening, because the underground is controlling the surface world. And I'm going to try and talk about that today. So I have a couple notes here, so bear with me. Just briefly, we talked about in the last video how the ancient builder race came down, dug a bunch of tunnels, created huge cities down here, and basically made a life for themselves until they had to leave. And then when they leave, they just leave all their stuff. They leave all their mechs, all their ray guns, they do all kinds of things, like incredible imaging, 40 miles, 100 miles through rock. I forget what it is actually. There's actually a number to it. That's what Richard Shaver talked about. But you could see for miles, no one could touch you. That all the cities were completely surrounded by this mech, as they call it. There's thought wire. Thought wire is where you can sit in basically a throne, the throne type, and these are huge in the underground. I'm talking fast because I'm trying to get 20 minutes in. And when you sit in this and are fed on, it probably goes over your head. And when you're fed this thought wire, you're basically you become the avatar of whatever it is that they had recorded. So in the stories, there was a character named Mutin Mayan, and he did all this fantastic, amazing stuff. And I believe that Richard Shaver was put into one of these chairs and fed this thought wire so that that's how he knows to write all this stuff, all this fantastic information, because his blind underground girlfriend helped him to this chair, to this throne, to this thought wire technology. And that's how he was able to not only like write about it, but to just, it was so intense for him, he was able to remember all of that as a different person. And he wasn't that person, but it just, living that. I mean, it would be like if you watch the Indiana Jones, that's a horrible reference because of Steven Spielberg, but if you watch the Indiana Jones movie, you could be Indiana Jones because it would be thought wire. You would be that avatar and you would be living it. And I believe that is where the cloning technology probably stems from. All of it stems from all this stuff. And we will get into the cloning chambers because a lot of this stuff, as you get more and more closer to the surface, you're interacting and combining with the surface world, which is the military complex, and that's the Illuminati cabal that we know of. They mimic everything that's going on in the underworld, and there's like entire families that live in the underworld, and these families are like crews, basically. They're like organized crime, and so what I want to talk about today is like it's a common pattern that happens. Once you get this amazing technology, you can control anything. You can control people, and that is this huge theme that we're going to talk about. That's always going through everything. It's love versus the lack of love. It is power over or versus shared power. The wonderful civilizations that existed, the Tatarian civilizations, the Lemurian, and even the Atlantean civilizations, they existed because of shared power. They all had free energy. They all were able to go to amazing locations to learn, amazing, halls of education, real science. All that information was given. All that information was free. Anti-gravity technology, transportation technology, just everything was amazing. Teleportation, going to other stars, coming back with information from everywhere and sharing with everyone. Versus, and this is how the Atlantis ended, the very beginning of it started to end like this. It ended because one person who shall remain nameless, I think they did that on purpose, decided to consolidate all that for himself. And then, because again, this is what we're going to talk about, how the energy changed, and it changes some people in their ego centers, in their mind somehow. I don't know how, Richard Shaver says it's some sort of heavy metal that starts collecting in the ego centers of the brain. Charles Freak talks about being stuck in the 10% of your, of your left side of your brain, of your ego center, which is basically like a loop, an electrical loop. So it's eat, kill, die, have sex. And that's a huge part of it. We're going to talk about that. Having sex and having this attraction, this animal, what Richard Shaver talked about, an animal magnetism, which is what we call today sexual attraction or sexual gratification. They use it. That's a technology because that's that's probably one of the biggest controllers of this body because we're in these meat suits. And I think these meat suits were created out of this technology way back then and refined. We've also got the Anunnaki who also created the Adama strain. That could be us. Could the Anunnaki be part of this Atlantean and Lemurian civilizations? Absolutely. And we'll get into that at some other distant point, but let's just consider them all together because, according to Richard Shaver and according to many, many people and according to all kinds of, ancient literature, um, there was all kinds of civilizations coming in and out, including the reptile civilizations. And they weren't very well liked, though. I have to say, though, I think that they did exist here amongst us in sight form and just cohabitated with us. It wasn't like it is now. Once some sort of rift happened, they seemed to get extremely, violent and agitated towards us to the point of they control us now. And that's the fight that we have now. And it's probably been a fight for quite some time. So I don't want to get too vague on that. So let's get to specifics. Okay, so Richard Shaver has an alphabet. This is one of the many things that I believe that prove that all of this is so true and accurate. Because if it wasn't, none of this would make any sense. I mean, like if he was just making up stuff, you could easily just shoot it down, but you can't because the alphabet that he talks about, these specific sounds, and in our alphabet, the letters have a specific sound, and they are seen everywhere in all kinds of words, and they mean the same thing, and it crosses all these different languages, including Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, and that it shouldn't happen that way, according to the official story of language on Earth here. So, if you delve into that rabbit hole, you'll see that is true. So one of the things that he talks about, one of the biggest things that we're going to talk about today is the row. These were beings that were rowed, and they had the technology to send out this thought wave, which ended up being rows of waves, rows of brain waves. And that's my belief, and I do believe that's what he referred to because, honestly, let's face it, he was a welder. Richard Shaver, I'm talking about here, this author. And, he described it as best he could. He did a pretty good job, but he didn't have, this is the collaboration now. At this point, this is like over 100 years later. So we need to, words have changed and phrases have changed. So this row, R-O, you'll see this prefix, or what I call a prefix. You'll see this like set of letters in all kinds of words. Row, like row your boat. Row over a bunch of waves. Romance. Romans, and that's a major thing because what happens, Romans, I don't think the Roman Empire was what we're led to believe. That's an official storyline. Do not believe any official storyline. The Romans got their technology and their marching orders and their information from where? The underground. Everything goes to the underground. So the underground families were controlling the row. And what do we see today? In Romania, not Romania, but in the Vatican, which is in Rome, and this is like in the heart of Roman territory. Everything rotated around where the Vatican stands now. And why? It's because what's underneath it, and there's all kinds of movies about it. Underneath the Vatican is hell. I mean, it's part of the underground. Hell is actually up by Helsinki, but it's a different story. Anyway, they're getting their information from some families that were in the underground underneath what now is the Vatican, and look what that is, and look how the Q team has gone in there and they're cleaning it out. So it's very important there. So Rho is seen in all these things. Romania, that was funny. I didn't actually remember that. Moron, that's a good one. Moron, because you're a moron. You're a robot. Robot. Okay, so robotics is again. You're not your own thinker. You're being rode. So they were rode, and they thought, okay, so this is getting back into this whole morals. Well, actually, that's slightly different, actually. But the whole morals of all of this is because, and even Shaver talked about this, this will get into this other thing of veriform. That'll be the next step we go into. But they were doing certain sciences that may or may not have been, ethically approved from the Galactic Federation. Galactic Federation, we'll just touch on that for half a second, is what I believe to be a federation of galactics, and they, there's a certain level of morality that needs to happen. This is that goodly, godly thing where you're trying to bring, the highest level of God or source in, and you're trying to feed that information in, and it gets distorted, but you're doing your best to to mimic whatever the highest level of source is. And then as it starts coming down, it gets stepped down, that energy, that information, that like telephone, like the game telephone, and the message gets distorted. Now, what I'm saying is that these civilizations, as they started to step down from the ancient builder race, they started to distort this technology. So there were people that were just basically slaves. They probably had a good life. They're probably just like us. We have a life. We go home at the end of the day and recoup with our families. I don't know how they, how they progenited. I don't know how they were created. So I don't know if they were clones, or if they actually, regenerated themselves in a nuclear family situation. Besides the point, he never talked about that. But what was very important was the Ro knew how to do everything because of this information that was being rode to him. This informational brainwaves that would just feed him all this information, and they would just do it like a robot. And they'd probably turned off at some point. Okay, so that's where it comes in, where apparently this one character, where am I at here? Apparently this one character in this story, and this reoccurring pattern, decided to consolidate the power for himself. So he was going to have all this power over everybody else, and he was in charge of security for Atlantis, Lemuria, where they were. And I'm not sure if this is the very first. I kind of feel like this is like a later version of Atlantis in Lemuria. So this is probably like into the second gen or the third gen. And there were buildings already now. The row were already happening. They were probably building the buildings. There was the elevators that went from the surface and deep into the underground. There were already these massive cities that reached up as farther than the eye could see, from the underground to the surface. So there were surface buildings that popped through the crust. It's all hollow. They had already built the networks, all the webbing, all the maglev trains, everything, the above land trains, everything was already built. There was massive centers of education, of true science, of all that was all going on. They were dancing, they were having fun, and there were the veriforms. Okay, the veriforms were these bodies that they took on. Okay, so even though Richard Shaver didn't talk about the spiritual aspect at all, really, he just alluded to it. But this is a huge deal. He said in this story that even though they knew, and some other civilizations thought this was unethical, this civilization did take on the veriforms, and the veriforms were the ability to take DNA and transpose it and put it together, and then they were able to take these bodies and what we would call now an avatar, and they would live in these bodies, and it would be different animal forms. I mean, they could have a tail, and they would, it sounded like they were kind of having fun with it. So they would create their own avatar. They would create their own bodies and they would live in it. So that inherently means that, again, our consciousness can leave out of the body and change into another body. Like Kurt Vonnegut Jr. would talk about in some of his stories, where you just wear this body like a robe, and you might even change it every day. And so, and that, again, that goes into this technology of the cloning chambers and what we're seeing today with the doppelganger, because they have it. They stole all that technology and they're hiding it from us, and they're using it, trying to use it against us. All the network, TV, mainstream media, politicians, gatekeepers, they all have avatar bodies, and they use them all the time. They break down. Look at Hillary Clinton. Smells like freaking hell warmed over because her avatar body's probably been, her real body's been dead for years, and they're just using her avatar body, which disintegrates within a small matter of time, and it smells like a corpse. I mean, and there's other different technologies. You can have a silicone-based clone body, but that's different. Okay, that's anyway. So getting back. Okay, so we're touching on that. Now the civilizations have their tunnels up and running. They're massive. They're giants. They are veriform giants. 20 feet, 40 feet. That's not uncommon. There's small people. There's the row, and it's all organized. Everything's organized. Now this is like by the first wave of Lemurian cities and civilizations and Atlantean civilizations. It's all organized. By the second one, it's super organized. By the third one, it's chaos. They're trying to reorganize what they had. Bit of cold coffee. By Tataria, I'm not even sure. I feel like it's very organized, and I feel like that was a bit of a golden age. So it went from like golden age to chaos to golden age, and so this is like sort of a wave that keeps going. I'm trying to touch on these different subjects. What I want to do is I need to connect the underground, the black magic of the underground, because remember, magic is just high technology that we don't know about, that they can use and that they hide. And science is just a reoccurring thing. If you can keep making something reoccur on a consistent level, that's a science. Art is maybe a one-time thing, or how to do something that's inconsistent, somewhat consistently every time. But a science is really getting it down to the nuts and bolts and being able to do it every single time. And that is what they have done with Thoreau and with the teleportation and with the phasing out, the invisibility, with imaging, with communication. I'm leaving some things out, I know. Oh, with cloning. Yes, with duplicating your own body, with duplicating your own DNA, controlling things like puppets. There's puppetry. That's a weird subject, right? But there's all these stories of having an entire city laid out with tiny, tiny people that are puppets, using the DNA of those people to create these tiny puppets and controlling these people. Now, if you consider that all these stories that I'm telling you are true, which they are all true, and they're all provable, and they're all been written about through many, many manuscripts, but the one mainly we're dealing with, the Richard Shaver manuscripts. If those are true, then this has to be true. All that stuff is weird, and that's really weird. So we just have to assume it's true, and it is true, because we can see that they're doing it today on a large-scale basis. Okay, so I have to quickly touch on stingrays, okay? So remember, the mech, they can do all kinds of things. They could take a horse and turn it into a glop of glue, of just basically DNA glue sitting there on the floor. You'll see that in like the Ant-Man movies. They'll show you that. The Illuminati has to show you. They're not smart enough to make up their own stuff, so they have to show you what they already know. And what they know is amazing. They lord it over us. That's why they show it to us. Also, they show it to us because they feel like now they can get away with stuff if they show it to us, because then we accepted it, and that's part of the control level. But anyway, the stingray is a certain setting. And I think I do have images of this. And if you go to my Facebook page, and I invite everybody to go to my Facebook page and just go there and look, because I'm trying to put all this stuff there. But the stingray is basically short for stimulating ray, and this stim ray I'm not sure why they would use it. Originally, they used it, I think, to just allow everybody to have fun. I remember the story was there was a very mild stim ray over the dance that they went to. Moot and Meon went to it with his wife, to this dance, and that was where the first murder took place on what I think is the second breakdown of Atlantis. But we're getting into the stim ray. So the stim ray is it stimulates you. It stimulates your mind. It makes you feel good. Okay, that's the key. That's the key because they abuse it. So the stim ray ends up turning into this major debauchery of the underground, and that is why I'm trying to connect the debauchery of all this black magic with the underground and the surface world, and the Phoenicians and the Canaanites and now the Satanists and the Luciferians and all these people. They're all the same people. They're all trying to worship these underground people and these underground evil families that do all these things, that perform all this debauchery, which is a lot of it is because of the stim ray, and it's just like drugs, and pharmakia is mimicking all that. All the drugs that we have on the surface world that they use to stimulate us, like cocaine and heroin, and I'm not going to include LSD. I guess you can include LSD. Any of those, even weed for that matter, alcohol, that are all stimulating, and they take you away from your normal everyday purpose, which is to bring in God, to be goodly and godly, to bring, and it's a distortion. But anyway, so the stim ray is an actual machine that they built, or a setting on these machines that they'd built, and it got hijacked. And so imagine eventually that all these underground cities that were abandoned and now re-inhabited by who knows what, and originally by quite good and noble people. But then that started to turn into the hell that it became and is now. And that is because of the stim rays. And so many times somebody would just turn the stim ray on and just leave it on and just stay stimulated for like 100 years. And they would just dream through the thought wire and just dream that they were these great and noble heroes, when in actuality they were just stimming out on these gigantic beds, as the story goes. I mean, this is a really strange tale. I get it, but just bear with me here. And so that's turned into this massive debauchery of bringing down surface women. And doesn't that sound like the story of Noah, right? Again, with the women, with the earth women, always with the human women, the beautiful, beautiful earth women, which, by the way, there's nothing better than a beautiful earth woman. God, you guys are awesome. But I mean, and it turns into this human trafficking, and then it turns into like pedophilia, and then it turns into this whole, this debauchery. So the party that they were having downstairs, as I like to call it, down into the underground, deep into the underground chambers of these cities, were that they were hanging women on the wall as art. That's how powerful they were. They were stealing women from the surface world and just hanging them on the wall and adorning all these what were once beautiful places and palaces and used for great energy and for just science and education, and they just turned it into like a complete a party. And don't our parties, if they keep going, right, turn into a debauchery. And that's what happens. And they were just taking women and putting the stim on them, which is basically like an orgasm. I mean, that's what it was, till they died. So these women would just orgasm till they died, and they thought that was the height of entertainment. And then they have so much technology that is being abused down there. Some of this technology would bring you back to life, and so they were taking people and torturing them. They would torture them to death, bring them back, and torture them again. You could be tortured for hundreds of years. These are the stories of hell. This is what hell is, because it's actually happening. Are they phased out? Sure, probably. They're probably in a slightly different dimension. I don't doubt that at all. Okay, so I have very little time, so I'm going to start to end this. So we talked about the underground families. The surface world wants this power. This is what the Canaanites, which, the Canaanites, the Babylonians, the Sumerians getting it from the Anunnaki, because the Anunnaki are negative beings. They're all human trafficking. If you talk to Corey Good or David Wilcock, they'll tell you all this. The human trafficking is an off-world thing, and it's a negative being thing. So I'll just sort of leave it at that, where I'm right at the 25-minute mark. I probably have very precious time left. But I want to jump into I'm going to talk about the next time, which is the Chilean witches, which is an actual trial on the surface that actually talked about these underground witches, because as Richard Saver described, all these people look like witches. We would describe them as witches or warlocks. And it's interesting to point out that the deeper you go into the spook world or the intelligentsia, it is witchcraft and warlocks, and that's how they refer to themselves. And that will delve into Tony Podesta, the Podestas, and Dahmer, and their artwork. And so we'll talk about that at a different time. And so thank you for being with me. This is Hanging Out with Maddie, and just some bizarre stories. Thank you for allowing me to elaborate on all that, because I think that we can come back to this information and really delve into it deeply. And I think it matters, because everything we see on the surface world is mimicking what they're doing down there, because they're all Satanists, and they're making us follow them, their music, their movies, their stupid movies, their stupid politicians, their stupid agendas, their stupid clothes, their stupid food, all their stupidity. Thank God evil is stupid. We're smarter than that. Be smarter. Where we go one, we go all. Peace out.